After I paid $44 billion at my son's wedding, his fiance called me broke. That line still lingers in my chest like smoke after a fire, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just a sentence. It was a dagger that slid in front of everyone I loved, in a hall I had built with sweat, persistence, and dreams for my family. My name is Richard. I was born in 1963 in Lagos, Nigeria. Back in my late 20s, I knew what it meant to rise from nothing. I grew up in a one-room house where my father fixed bicycles for a living, and my mother hawked groundnuts by the roadside. I felt the weight of poverty and the sting of watching opportunities pass because we had no money. But then something happened. I built a business empire from construction, oil, and real estate, layer by layer, until my name meant something. Today, at 62, seated in my study where silence usually comforts me, I'm finally sharing this because I want you to know that wealth does not shield you from humiliation, but wisdom can save your dignity. If you're listening, drop your city below, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you is a story you won't forget. From the moment my son Daniel told me he wanted to marry Vanessa, I vowed that his union would be a celebration people would whisper about for decades. I spared nothing. The guest list had presidents, celebrities, and business moguls. The venue was a palace draped in white roses flown in from Holland, chandeliers imported from Italy, and a runway aisle that glittered like crushed diamonds. When the bride walked in, her gown wasn't just fabric, it was custom embroidery stitched with crystals, designed by the same atelier that had dressed royalty. Every plate of food had been crafted by Michelin star chefs. There were fireworks that painted the night sky with golden art. I had written one check after another until the final tally hit $44 million. It was about ensuring his wife-to-be felt cherished. It was about legacy. Friends clapped me on the back, saying, "Richard, you've outdone yourself." And I laughed, lighthearted, because this was my joy. Then came the moment of the final toast. The music softened. Glasses chimed. I stood at the center, holding my champagne, speaking words from my heart. I told my son I was proud of him, proud of the man he had become. I told Vanessa that I welcomed her into my family with both arms. I spoke about love being stronger than money, about family being wealth beyond calculation. The crowd cheered. I sat down, my chest light, believing that joy would end the night. But Vanessa rose. Her gown shimmered beneath the light. She raised her glass, and with a smile that seemed sweet, she said, "We are grateful for this wedding, though I do hope father-in-law doesn't think money makes him immortal. 44 million is a lot, but from what I hear, he's stretched thin. A man like him should be careful, or soon he'll be broke." The hall gasped. The word broke landed like thunder. I felt my ears ring. For a moment I thought I had misheard, but the whispers around the tables confirmed it. Faces turned to me, some shocked, some amused, others pitying. Daniel chuckled nervously, placing his hand on her arm as if to hush her. But the damage had been done. My son's bride had mocked me in front of hundreds after I had spent $44 million to celebrate her. I tried to smile, tried to mask the tremor in my hand. "Youth speaks quickly," I said softly, but my voice cracked. A few laughed politely, but I knew the respect I had commanded for years had been cracked open like glass under a hammer. I excused myself and stepped outside into the cool night air. The fireworks had long gone, and the sky above seemed empty, mocking me with its silence. In that stillness, my mind replayed her words over and over. Broke, it wasn't just about money, it was about dignity. After decades of climbing, of proving myself, I had been cut down with one careless remark. My first instinct was anger. I wanted to storm back in, confront her, and demand an apology. But another voice whispered, "No, Richard, not anger, not here, not now." I remembered my own father's lessons, the ones he taught me as he repaired bicycles under the scorching sun. If someone spits on you, son, don't fight them in the mud. Stay clean, walk away, Let life show them who you are. I smiled faintly at guests as I re-entered, pretending the remark had not stung. I stayed until the end, clapped as they left for their honeymoon, and even kissed Vanessa's cheek, as if nothing had passed. But inside me, a quiet fire had been lit. That night, when I sat alone in my mansion, I poured myself a glass of brandy and stared at the family portraits on the wall. My late wife's smile stared back at me, warm and encouraging. I whispered, "Did I do too much? Did I spoil them to the point they forgot respect?" The silence in the room gave me no answer, but my heart knew something had shifted. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I began to plan, not out of spite, not out of revenge in the ugly sense, but out of a need to reclaim the respect that had been stripped from me. My son had chosen a woman who believed money equaled power, and she thought by mocking me, she had taken some of mine. But she didn't know me well enough. She didn't know that while I was generous with money, I was also meticulous with control. The first seed of my plan formed when I recalled the investments I had guided Daniel into: properties, companies, and shares that I had partially funded but kept under joint management. Vanessa believed they were theirs, but she didn't know how much of their foundation still traced back to my name. I realized I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to confront. All I had to do was adjust my hand on the wheel. So I decided to move quietly, like a shadow at their feast, unseen but always present. My humiliation at the wedding would not be answered with noise. It would be answered with silence, so deep it would echo louder than any insult. And in that moment, under the dim glow of my study lamp, I promised myself she would learn what it truly meant to call a man like me broke. The morning after that wedding, I rose earlier than usual, the taste of humiliation still sharp in my mouth. But instead of sulking, I slipped into the role that had always carried me through storms: strategist. I put on my tailored suit, not for a meeting, but as armor. My mirror reflected a man who had been wounded, yet unbroken. I whispered to my reflection, "This is not about anger, this is about wisdom." And with that, I began the quietest, most meticulous plan I had ever designed. I started by revisiting every thread of my son's new financial life. In the months leading up to the wedding, Daniel and Vanessa had been gifted properties, companies, and accounts, many of which had my signature hidden in the foundation. I had taught my son how to play the game of business, but I had not taught him every rule. Some deeds had clauses, some investments had conditions, and most of the leverage still sat in my palm. It was never meant to control him. It was meant to protect him from greed. Now it was about to protect him from his own wife. I contacted my lawyers quietly and asked them to prepare amendments for board decisions in the companies Daniel believed were theirs. With a few strokes of paperwork, my voting rights expanded. He still held shares, but the power of decision slowly slipped into my corner. No announcement, no noise. It was like adjusting the sails of a ship when the passengers were asleep. They would keep sailing, unaware the course was no longer theirs to command. At family dinners, I laughed at Vanessa's stories, nodded at her complaints about house staff, and even offered her wine with a smile. "You're too kind, father-in-law," she would say, her tone dripping with confidence, as though she had already outsmarted me. I said little, because silence is the most underestimated weapon. Behind the scenes, I tightened the strings. A luxury villa in Dubai, which Vanessa had bragged about as her escape home, was in fact under a mortgage I had orchestrated. A single phone call to my bankers restructured the loan. Payments doubled, deadlines shortened. Soon enough, she would realize the villa was not hers to flaunt. It was a cage with golden bars. I also turned my eyes to their accounts. Daniel had relied on a trust I created for him years ago. He never cared much for the details, only that the money flowed. Vanessa, however, was eager. She used it for designer clothes, extravagant trips, and parties that made social media buzz. She thought the river of wealth was endless. But quietly I began rerouting, not cutting him off that would expose me. No, I slowed the river into a stream, trickling in a way that forced them to notice the drying ground. Daniel came to me one afternoon, confused. Dad, the accounts are moving strangely. Vanessa says our balance is tighter than it should be. Did something happen? I sipped my tea and looked at him with calm eyes. Markets shift, son. Sometimes wealth teaches us lessons about management. Perhaps it's time to pay attention to the details. He frowned, scratching his head. Yeah? Maybe? I'll look into it. He didn't press further. That was Daniel, brilliant at following, but not yet sharp enough at leading. Vanessa, on the other hand, noticed. She called me one evening, her voice sweet but edged with impatience. Father, I heard some of the companies shifted structure. I thought Daniel and I had majority control. Was there a change? I chuckled warmly. My dear, business is always shifting. You must learn to adapt. Don't worry, everything is secure. She had the hunger, but not the tools. I knew then she was beginning to sense the invisible walls tightening. As weeks turned into months, their lifestyle began to strain. Creditors knocked. The staff she loved to parade were harder to pay. The parties became few. On Instagram, her smile faltered, though she tried to mask it with filters. I watched silently, like a fisherman waiting for the net to close. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to certain business associates and whispered small truths. Not lies, just hints. Vanessa has an expensive taste. Daniel is distracted. Their assets are tied up. In high society, perception is everything. Soon, invitations to elite events slowed. Investors hesitated. The glittering couple was no longer untouchable. Daniel, confused and anxious, visited me again. Dad, something's wrong. It feels like people are avoiding us. Deals are slipping. Even the villa, Vanessa says it's in trouble. What's happening? I placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Son, wealth is not armor. Respect is. When you build your life on greed, it crumbles. You must ask yourself, what foundation did you build with her? He looked at me, troubled, but still blinded by love. She just wants us to live big. Maybe I've been careless. I'll fix it. I smiled faintly. Fixing starts with seeing clearly. The more Daniel tried to fix it, the more Vanessa's frustration grew. I overheard one of their arguments when I visited unannounced. Her voice cut through the walls. Your father is choking us. He controls everything, and you let him. You're supposed to be a man. Daniel's voice cracked. He gave us everything. Without him, we'd have nothing. I stepped back from the doorway, my heart heavy. It was painful to hear my son torn between loyalty to his wife and gratitude to me. But I knew the storm had to rage before the skies cleared. One evening, Vanessa stormed into my study uninvited. Her eyes burned with fury. You're doing this. You're pulling strings behind the curtain. Admit it. As I looked at her steadily, my fingers folded over my glass of water. Vanessa, I don't need to pull strings. Time always reveals the truth. She slammed her fist on my desk. You want me to fail. You want me humiliated. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. No, I want my son to see who stands beside him when life isn't paved with diamonds. That's. Her silence stretched, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of losing the game she thought she had mastered. She turned and stormed out, her heels clicking like angry drums against my marble floor. In that silence after her departure, I allowed myself a small smile. The plan was working. She was unraveling, and soon, Daniel would see. And all the while, I remained the same, calm, generous on the surface, never raising my voice. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is not noise, not destruction, but patience. To let arrogance collapse under its own weight. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. Daniel showed up at my house without calling first, drenched, his shirt clinging to his skin, his face pale with exhaustion. He sank into the leather chair in my study and buried his face in his hand. I poured him a glass of brandy, the same way my father used to pour me palm wine when life weighed heavily. Dad, he muttered, his voice cracking. I don't know what to do anymore. Everything's falling apart. Deals are gone. The villa's in foreclosure. The trust fund is drying up. Vanessa, she's furious all the time. She says I'm useless. I placed the glass in his hand and let the silence breathe between us. before speaking. Son, the truth is not hidden. You've seen it, you just refuse to admit it. He looked up, his eyes were, are you saying she's been using me? I sighed, my chest heavy with both sadness and relief. I'm saying that love reveals itself in storms, not in sunshine. Vanessa loved what you represented, the money, the spotlight, the lifestyle. But when the ground shook, her love faltered. Daniel took a long sip, his hand trembling. All this time, I thought she had my back, but she turned on me when the second thing got rough. Dad, at the wedding, when she mocked you, I laughed it off. I thought it was just nerves. I didn't see it for what it was. I'm sorry. I reached over, squeezing his shoulder. Apologies aren't for me, son. They're for yourself. You have to decide what you want your life to be, built on glitter or built on truth. Vanessa had organized a gathering at their home, desperate to prove to the world they were still thriving. She wore diamonds, rented on credit, and welcomed guests with a wide smile that barely concealed her panic. But as the evening went on, one of her cards bounced. The caterer demanded payment. Guests began whispering, their eyes darting toward me in the corner of the room, as though waiting to see how I would respond. Vanessa's mask cracked. She shouted at Daniel in front of everyone, her voice shrill. Your father is ruining us. He's doing this deliberately. He wants us crawling back to him. Daniel froze, the room silent, all eyes on him. Then he did something that made my heart swell with both pain and pride. He straightened his back, looked her square in the eye, and said, no, Vanessa, you ruined us with your greed, your pride, your disrespect. My father gave us everything, and you spat on it. You mocked him when he spent millions to honor us, and now you stand here blaming him, when it's you who can't see beyond money. The words echoed in that grand room, like thunder. Vanessa's face was drained of color. She looked around for sympathy but found none. Her friends avoided her eyes. Some guests whispered. Daniel turned to me, his voice soft but steady. Dad, I finally see. I should have seen sooner. I should have defended you that night. I let you down. I stood slowly, every eye on me. Daniel, a man is not measured by the mistakes he makes, but by how he rises from them. You've risen. The sound felt like the end of a chapter. In the weeks that followed, Daniel filed for annulment. He came to me often, not as a son, begging for money, but as a man seeking wisdom. He asked how to rebuild, not wealth, but respect. And I guided him, patiently, teaching him what my father taught me, that true riches are measured in integrity, in family, in the quiet strength to walk away from noise. Vanessa tried to fight, of course. She demanded assets, tried to manipulate contracts, but every legal paper she touched led back to my safeguards. She discovered too late that the empire she thought she owned was never hers to begin with. Like a sand castle washed by the tide, her power dissolved before her eyes. I heard from friends that she left the country in shame, her name whispered only as a cautionary tale at cocktail parties. She had wanted to climb higher by mocking me, but instead she fell by her own greed. He visited me one evening, his eyes calmer, his voice steadier. Dad, I used to think money solved everything, but now I know it doesn't. Respect does. You do. I want to build differently now, on values, not vanity. I smiled at him, feeling my heart swell the way it had the day he was born. That's all I ever wanted, son. Not for you to be rich, but for you to be wise. The humiliation of that wedding night no longer hurt. In fact, it became the turning point. Vanessa thought she had shamed me, but in the end, she only revealed her own emptiness. And I, who walked away quietly, came out stronger, respected not for the millions I spent, but for the silence I kept. When I sit now by my study window, the night breeze cooling my skin, I think about my late wife. I imagine her smile, her whisper, well done, Rich. You let wisdom speak louder than pride. And I smile back at the silence, grateful, because true wealth isn't in fireworks or crystal gowns. It isn't in the whispers of a crowd or the applause of strangers. True wealth is in the quiet dignity of a man who knows when to walk away, when to wait, and when to let truth reveal itself. Moral lesson:
Life will test you in public with insults, and in private with choice. Don't waste energy fighting in the mud. Preserve your dignity, and let time expose what pride conceals. Love built on greed will always collapse, but respect built on patience lasts forever. If you are mocked for giving too much, remember generosity speaks louder than any sneer. Sometimes the best revenge is not shouting, but watching silently as arrogance unravels itself. So hold your head high, protect your peace, and trust that wisdom will always bring the balance back in your favor. You've got this.